Legal cases, legal issues, legal matters. You're watching WFTV's Law Talk with anchor Christopher Heath and expert legal analyst, attorney Mark NeJame.
All right, let's talk about some of the current cases, issues, and legal matters that our viewers are talking about. Joining me today is legal analyst attorney Mark NeJame of the NeJame Law Firm, and John Zielinski, a senior partner in the civil litigation division over there. I'm going to open up with a couple facts here. Just some from a Pew survey that came out. The number of Americans 18 and older married has fallen. It was at 58% in 1995. It's at 53% now. Meanwhile, the number of Americans over 18 cohabitating has increased in that same time period from 3% to 7%. And within this comes a lot of legal questions, because obviously when you get married, it's easier to kind of divide up where assets go if the marriage dissolves. But if you're living together, there's a lot of questions out there.
Well, there's always a lot of questions whenever anybody breaks up. But in this instance, cohabitation really does have some unique issues to it. People fall in love, or they think they're in love, and then they buy a home together. And because, particularly in this market and in this day and age where it's very difficult for one person, a young person, to maybe be able to afford it or support it by themselves. So they buy it. Well, they're both on the mortgage, they're both on the deed, and then they break up. Well, they might even work it out between themselves. Okay, then I'll go ahead and one of them will go ahead and keep the house and make the payments. What they don't realize is that just because you've transferred over the deed doesn't mean you've transferred over the mortgage. So the person who vacates is still stuck on that mortgage. And so if the other person makes late payments or doesn't make payments at all, it can devastate their credit. And not only that, but not only is their credit at risk, but what ends up happening is they likely can't qualify for a new home for themselves because they're already tied up on one mortgage. So if in fact their finances are such that they can only qualify for a single mortgage, they now are stuck for as long as that other person, the person that they got broken up with, is in that property, and they can't do anything about it. And the mortgage companies will require you to, if you're going to try to refinance, to be able to refinance on your own. And often that's not the case because they don't have the ability.
And John, this is one of those things, people go into this, it's all rose-colored glass. It's all going to be perfect. We're going to live happily, forever and ever. And, through circumstances or whatever, it doesn't work out. But now all of a sudden you own a car together. You own a house together. You got a condo together. The law is going to get involved in splitting those up, and it's not going to be as clear-cut as filing for divorce because you weren't married.
Absolutely. In a partition action, which is what is used in those situations where there's not a marriage to end and to go into divorce court and try and work those things out. But in partition, they do look a lot at what are the contributions of each of the respective parties. And, if one has been contributing more, they're going to assert that I should get more than 50-50. It shouldn't be a straight down the middle split. But the court may not agree with that. Another point, now that you mentioned automobiles, you're on the hook for that automobile. If your partner that you've now broken up with gets in an auto accident, you're on the hook for that auto accident just as if you were driving that vehicle under Florida law as well. So that's another consideration that you got to factor into when you get into these relationships that you might not think about because of the love and you want to be happy with this person.
Because when we think about marriage, we often think about, the ceremony and all that, but in the legal realm, marriage is essentially, it's a legal construct, and it provides certain, both on the front end and unfortunately on the back end, there's that. When we're talking about cohabitation, a lot of that color of law just vanishes, and now you're left trying to sort things out.
And all they've got maybe is their agreement or lack of an agreement with one another. And really, you don't want, it's just, you almost should have a prenuptial, but we call it a pre-dating, because what you really should do is simply write it all down. It's really, something that people think might take away some of the romance of the relationship, but nobody knows the future. And the fact is that if you go ahead and have a simple contract that says in the event we choose not to stay together, then this is what we're going to do. We're going to agree to sell the property and we'll split the proceeds. Or if one person wants it, then they have to qualify on their own, and if they can't, then the property gets sold. Then you've got those issues defined, and the parties are not going to get stuck. But it's really important, and if you're old enough to be able to qualify for a mortgage and have the maturity to live together, then you should be mature enough to go ahead and have a simple agreement knocked out between the two of you, which spells out all these issues in the event a contingency occurs of death or breakup or anything along those lines, because you do have these responsibilities that can forevermore impact your credit if you don't handle it properly from the onset.
And very briefly, you brought up something I hadn't even thought about, and John, I want you to weigh in on this. Death. You know, one of the partner maybe passes away very tragically. Their family may come in and say, well, hold on, they paid for half this house that you guys are living in. The family would like part of it. It just gets even thornier and thornier the further afield you get.
Absolutely. You can go in, you know, again with those rose-colored glasses and, you know, buy this property. There's a breakup. Well, you know, the person that remains in the home tries to pay for that home. They're on the title together. And then what happens is maybe some years later, the person paying the mortgage dies. Then what happens? Now you got all these complications because you got a lender that wants to collect, you got a party that's been out of possession of that property for a long period of time. Depending upon how the title is held, you know, is it a joint tenancy title? Because joint tenancy, then that person that is surviving will take the property subject to the mortgage. But if that person is only a tenant in common, then the person who has passed, their family will come into play and they'll get a half of it.
And that brings up an issue that it's just not young people. A lot of seniors are now cohabitating for a whole variety of reasons, but with them being closer to leaving the earth at some point, those issues for their families and for who the beneficiaries are become all the more relevant. But you know, there's so many seniors now who are choosing to cohabitate, sometimes for tax purposes and sometimes for family purposes or just their own individual choice. But they need to be equally cautious, and they can have rose-colored glasses as well. You know, you don't stop loving just because you hit a certain age. And so they need similarly to be aware of getting that contract done up. It doesn't have to be anything overly formal, but it can spell it all out, get it signed, get it notarized, get it witnessed, and get it done properly.
John, I appreciate it. Mark, as always, thank you very much. If you'd like to see any more of these law talks or watch this one again, visit our website, wftv.com/legal, or join us each week right here on Facebook. I'm Christopher Heath, and thanks for watching.
WFTV's Law Talk was brought courtesy of the Personal Injury and Accident Division of NeJame Law.